Deepblocks. I had the fortune of meeting her in person in Miami, and let me tell you guys, within 5 to 10 minutes, like I was super inspired by her. She was so helpful and one of the kindest AEC Tech founder I know. So thanks a lot
Thank,
for being on the show, Olivia.
thank
Means
you
a
for
lot.
having me. I just want to say I love your project. I love the way you've built your project, and I'm also very inspired by your work. So I'm grateful to be here.
Means a lot. So if I were to ask from your childhood to pre-deep blocks, what would be the three highlights of your journey?
Okay, that's a lot of years. I okay, so I would say the first one is migrating from Cuba, which required a very intense change of culture, a new language, a new way of navigating in a political world, even as a child. And I think that gave me flexibility. Okay, and it kind of excitement about new things, and I think you need that to start any company. Also, in Cuba, my upbringing as a violinist, I think as a child musician, you have to learn how to be responsible for the instrument. I practiced 4 hours of violin in the morning before I went to school, woke up at 4 a.m. So that gave me a lot of structure and discipline. And I think structure and discipline is needed when you don't have a boss to tell you what to do. And then lastly, I think probably my graduate school studies in architecture at Columbia, because like I didn't learn what I thought I would learn in architecture, and I didn't do so well in my structures class, but it did help me really understand how information comes together to form a building. And I think that that was necessary for me to get into the world of big data, get into the world of machine learning, and so I'm very grateful for that as well.
I see. In when you were in your Columbia days, what were your aspirations to do in your career at that time, and how it has evolved?
Yeah, so I thought that I was going to graduate and be a star architect, right away. I thought that I was going to be able to like transform the way we build. I thought we were going to, be able to change. Like I wanted to detach the building from the infrastructure and prove that we can have systems to make them autonomous, to convert all our waste into resources. And I was like, so excited about that. And then I had a few internships, and I realized that that was not the case, that like the developer made a lot of the decisions. And there were, I took really interesting courses on star architects and what it took to be a star architect, and I didn't have a lot of those criterias. And so that's why I did a second master's in real estate development.
In the main motivation to do that master was to have like impact from the start of the project.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to, and this is reflected on the work at Deepblocks, but I wanted to build everything myself. So I wanted to have all the information, be able to select a site, be able to say what's going to go on it, what was the demand, and then design the building and build it. Like I didn't know that different disciplines did that work for some reason. Like I wasn't paying attention. But so I was like, okay, now I need a master's. And then after that, I was like, okay, I need to work in construction, and I need to work in brokerage, and I need to work in development and architecture to really understand how to put it all together.
I see. And w- once you started working, was there any like conflicting thoughts that you had during school that okay, this is how I think the industry works, but when you actually started, okay, there's so many differences in what you assume and what it works now.
Yeah, it was nothing like what I had done in school. It was, like, for example, like in some of the projects I worked on, like the position of the sun wasn't even taken into account. Like everything that I learned in terms of how to make a project work with its environments, I felt like wasn't really being applied in some of the projects I was working on. And not to say that they weren't great projects and great architects, it was just the priorities were different, and the constraints were different. In school, for whatever reason, we didn't learn about budgets, we didn't learn about zoning restrictions, we didn't learn, you know, and that's okay, I think, because it was an opportunity to explore other ways of thinking. But in the real world, there were all these constraints that I didn't understand, and so there was a lot of cognitive dissonance, and I was very confused as to like what actually made a building happen.
I see. And any tips for young architects who wants to be in that path? How could they learn faster and have those learnings, or is it you just grind it?
No, no, I think understanding basic real estate finance, and you can YouTube that. Like you don't have to get a master's in real estate. I just didn't know it existed, right? So I
Mm,
was very behind. But I think as a young architect, understanding finance, understanding market analysis, site selection, which is a little bit more intuitive. But I think finance and what construction breakdowns, major line items, these are the things that like informed a little bit more about the true constraints of a project.
yeah. And were there any like professors or mentors who made a big impact or influenced your career?
Yes, absolutely. I think the most impactful to the career I have today were, well, at school it was Mark Wigley, the dean of architecture at the time, because he said things that would really hurt my feelings, like architecture has been dead for a long time, and I was like, what does that even mean? Or like he also was a big proponent of big data, and this was like back in 2008, 2009. We didn't have a big data craze until like 2010, 2012. So he really inspired me to move into, like, when I applied for the DARPA program and things like that. And then later on at Singularity University, Neil Jacobstein was one of the most influential mentors. He's one of the fathers of AI in Silicon Valley, and he told me, like, take a product to market that does not require AI if possible. And then as you understand that product better and market fit better, then you see where the opportunities to apply AI are. And I think that I needed to hear that, because in my mind, AI was the first thing, and we were going to like boil the ocean with it, and that's unfortunately not the way it works.
I see. And a lot of people talk about AI and big data for real estate, and there's also a lot of discussions around a lack of data and a lot of clean data. So, what has been your experience of that, and what are the possible use cases which requires more effort? What are some low-hanging fruits?
Yes. So one of the first things we encountered when we started in 2016 was that zoning data had not been digitized at scale, and it had definitely not been digitized in a kind of historical panel, right? And so if we wanted to predict where development could be, and if we wanted to understand trajectories of city development over time, we needed that data. We thought, and we felt, and I think we figured this out later, but like in hindsight, that there was something about zoning data that would give us an edge in investment. And so we started digitizing ourselves. It took us 3 years to digitize 30 cities. And in that process, we understood it better. We understood the parameters that were most important. And then we applied different kind of just simple algorithms and scripts to automate some of that. And after 6, 7 years, we finally got to a point where we had enough volume of data that we can begin to play with machine learning and see if it was possible for machine learning to extract that data automatically. And there's been many failed attempts on our side, and we're finally, getting to something really interesting. But it's taken a long time.
I see. And can you walk us through like the early days of Deepblocks? Like what was like, did you start with a customer? How did you find your first customer? How was your first MVP and stuff? Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, let's see, my assumption at the time was that the tools that we had were not integrated enough.
Mm.
So we had like Excel and the performance happening on one side, your financial analysis. We had the 3D model happening in CAD. And there was nothing at the time that integrated these two things. And I thought that that was really what would be impactful. And of course, like that has to be tested. So that was the first thing we built was purely software, and it was 3D model combined with a financial model. And what we realized when we began to bring in the assumptions for height and parking and all of these things were integrated without the data necessarily, we realized that the data that would populate those assumptions was more valuable than the expression of that, integration, more valuable to the market. So people kept saying like, oh, but the data, oh, but the data. And that's where we began, the journey, and we kind of pivoted towards like, really focusing on the data. 80% of our work, it's on the data, and 20% is on actual software. So we started with a software product that's still live today, and it's adopted, but we realized that the data was the most important. And that was a harsh reality, as a founder, to think that you're going to change the world with one thing and then realize you're like totally wrong and it was like something else. So that was the beginning, and that started the journey towards kind of more a path towards intelligence from data rather than optimization of the building itself. And I think most prop techs in the development phase have to make that decision at some point.
In what would be the most toughest or difficult thing in first year, second year, and third year of Deepblocks, like each year wise?
Yes, I think as a first-time founder, and if I first of all, I don't know if I would start another company, but if I did, it'll be so much, there'll be so much efficiency because as a first-time founder, you're super naive. Let's just talk about my. I was super naive, and I thought that you could build something and it'll be adopted right away. And I think the harsh reality of bringing something to market without marketing, without any SEO strategies, without any kind of, if you, that was like such a harsh reality for like a young team to be like, we build it, it's beautiful, and then like just waiting there to get adopted, nothing happened. So like that was a big lesson to understand marketing. We didn't really apply marketing for years. We first had to understand that data was more powerful than software. And then we had to understand that even once we had the data, how do we reach the people that would understand that this data is powerful? And so I think those steps in communication with your potential buyer was something that was not super clear when I started, and it became more and more clear as more pain, we felt the pain of not selling. So I think that that's really important. And you've solved that. You went directly to the buyer and you are building your product based on, real buyers that are willing to invest. And, I didn't think that way at the beginning. That was something that was, counterintuitive to me.
Yeah, like we also like started B2C and then pivoted to B2B. So it was a journey. You,
It happens, yeah.
yeah. So okay, actually, I'm interested year wise or first year, second year, third year.
Yeah, no, I mean that's been the journey. And even now, it's like I think something else too is like really understanding like what's available, right? Because every year something else becomes available that's really interesting. And you know, the last 18 months, 20 months on the whole craze of LLMs. And now, we went from like, very tough to train NLPs to like much easier, much nicer, to like much you know, just great experience in fine tuning LLMs, like things that have come into the market and LangChain and all of these tools that are now like flooding the market. You have to stay flexible to adapting new things, and that goes, you know, in every topic that we can talk about, is that flexibility. And I think as a founder, you become more flexible over time, not by choice, but by like, you know, hitting a couple of walls.
Yeah, and speaking of LLM, like I saw this too, this announcement from Deepblocks DB, and I was like, such a great idea. Now I like practical application of AI, and so any story on like how this idea was initiated and
Yes, actually, super interesting like experience. So we were building something that would help me with marketing, that would help me generate these graphs that you see
mm,
from demographic data, and would help us understand which markets had some potential of growth before that growth was, you know, super apparent. And when ChatGPT came out, I was like, oh my God, we don't have to build all of these scripts to like process this data. And I started just like dumping the data straight into, you know, ChatGPT, and I realized it was not analyzing the data correctly. And like it
mm,
would get it wrong a lot. And I was like, oh no. And so I was like, that could be an opportunity. Like, what if we collaborated with ChatGPT, or in this case, there's now a lot of different models we could do that with. We structured the data. We, you know, created visuals for that data, but then we used the model, ChatGPT model, to analyze that data. And we found that if we fed the data in a way where it was more results of the data, we would
mm,
get really interesting analysis, that, you know, patterns that we couldn't kind of detect ourselves. And that's what's live right now. What we're doing as a second iteration of this is actually fine tuning a model based on all of this
nice.
data. But this was a way to interact with the market to see, is there interest? Is, you know, is it valuable to have every single data point, you know, from the Census Bureau in a visual way and in an analytical way? So it's still a big experiment for us, but really useful for marketing and for customers to understand market behavior.
Yeah, like from like one of the experiment I was doing, like when you dump a lot of data in ChatGPT, there's also like problem of hallucination, and then depending on the problem you're solving, okay, if you're summarizing, there could be smarter ways. Okay, you could just feed the type of data and then ask LLM to generate like structured query, and then you compute the result and then fed that result instead of doing so. It's yeah, a lot of experimentation to find like what tricks to work the balance of both rule-based computation and LLM-based like computation. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was actually having a conversation this morning about that. Like, when you're used to building product and working with data, just product and data, you kind of get this impression, okay, I need to like really define something and then we build it, and it's as simple. When you start to introduce any type of AI that your product is contingent on, that like it's not just because we've been using AI to digitize data and to help detect data, but once we put it in the product, you kind of break all the rules of like, you know, architecture, then, planning and then building. Now you're just building a big experiment, and you're
Mm,
running it over and over again until you figure out, you know, a successful output. So it's a much more, I think, interesting way to build product.
yeah, and I was checking out like other products in this tab, and so yeah, like any like quick overview about the other offerings you'd like to share.
Well, thank you. But yes, I mean, this, I think Pro actually was the first product we ever built. And what's really powerful here is that is showing the how useful zoning data at the parcel level could be, and to be able to canvas an entire city and understand, where you can build certain things instantly, something that would take many, many months. And, essentially, like, as you know, is efficiency, right?
Mm.
Finding, like, 1000x efficiencies. And this is one product that proves that. And we're happy, very happy about it.
And this is the product which, like you were sharing earlier, took 3 years for the 30 cities to digitize, because once it's
Yes,
digitized, you could do like this querying and like other calculation on top of it.
exactly. And now we've digitized 250 cities, which has produced about 800 gigabytes of data, which is now like a proper amount to say, okay, let's fine tune a model to really understand zoning. And so that's the most exciting thing, I think, we're working on right now.
Yeah, like I'm also like curious to know, because sometimes as founders, like you have also like, okay, how much time is enough time to put on R&D versus like revenue and customer development? Because I don't know, like different founders face different pressure from their investors or other to have the growth. So like how is your like roadmap strategy? Like how do you plan it for?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think as a founder, you're the most flexible person on the team, meaning like you could be the most fragmented. Everybody else has to be super hyper focused on whatever we're building at the time or whatever we're improving. So then I learned how to code a little bit. I learned how to, especially with ChatGPT, and so what I've done is whatever experiments I want to do, I'll code them first. I'll prove to the team that they're valuable, and I'll even, use it for marketing and test it in the market before we bring it into production. And so, and even once we bring it to production, it's still an experiment, but at least it's been tested and it's been proven, to a certain extent. So I take on a lot of the R&D,
Mhm.
because we have a small team, and then I'll bring in, different team members to expand that, when it makes sense.
And how do you keep yourself up to date with, there's like crazy amount of AI research, new products launching every week, and so many possibilities.
So I'm very, 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 very lucky that everyone on the team is doing that research out of their own curiosity and their own kind of excitement for the technology. And I often get like texts on a Saturday morning, from like our lead engineer being like, "You have to check this out." So I
Nice.
think the team pushes me more than anything to be on top of things. And I do about an hour or two of studying something. Like right now, we're doing a few projects with a new collaboration on lead generation, and so I need to understand that better, and understand SEO better, and statistics better. And so like I just make sure that I'm studying as much as possible the things that we might need. And it's great. It's great. I think, if that's part of the job, I think it's wonderful.
Yeah. Actually, that's also one aspect I enjoy about being founder is like learning new domains, new tasks, to keep the company running, but also like, okay, I was reading the other day about programmatic SEO, and I like, what is SEO 2.0, and like how is SEO in the age of AI and stuff like that. So well,
Yes. And to like, yes, and I love that topic, and I'm studying a lot about that too. You have to learn the basics of SEO to make that work. So now
mm,
I'm like going back to like the art of SEO, which is like the Bible of SEO, and like SEO for growth. And so if I'm driving, I'm like hearing books about it, and then like in the mornings I'm studying. And so you got to really like, otherwise you're gonna build all these pages that mean absolutely nothing,
Mm.
to the indexing. And so yeah,
I see.
exactly.
So, in what's your like approach to become like from zero to like knowledgeable in a new topic? Like, do you read books, podcasts, videos, or like find one person who is like one step ahead you in the topic and do like, okay, hop on a call and I want to.
I do books because like I'm sure there are great podcasts and I'm sure there are great blogs about certain things, but I feel like to make a book, you have to like really plan and really structure the way somebody understands whatever that topic is. And so for me, I feel like I get a much deeper understanding from a book. And I love books. I buy like 3 books a week. So I just love books, and so that's the way I learn the best.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Y-
It could
You
be
know,
audiobook.
yeah. Like I also correlate a lot to that because the beauty of books is there's no distraction. Like blog, you have to click another link, or audio, there's some advertisement between and ruins your focus. You just like sometimes, like depending on the book, I get flow state and I'm like, oh, time pass, but I have to complete this book before I do another job.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. No, and also like I write blogs, right? As you know, you do podcasts. So you understand kind of there's some things that get missed, you
Hmm.
know, and which is great to like have an overall understanding. But if you really want to become an expert in something, this took a person 3 years to make, and you're
Hmm.
getting it in like, and you could even hear it at 2x the speed. So you're getting it in like 4 hours. And that's really exciting for me.
Interesting. In your top three books, t- like which you recommend
On
everyone?
on what subject? It depends. Um, I mean, there's a lot of great books. There's let's see. Well, if you're interested in SEO, the art of SEO, of course. Um, the I'm reading. I love David Foster Wallace, so I just started reading Infinite Jest. So I can't vouch for it yet, but he's just the most amazing writer, or he was. And I'm also finishing Sapiens,
Mm,
which, like, for
classic.
me, as I've learned so much about like our species because of that book. And so I try to mix it a little bit of the things that I need, and then kind of allow the imagination and fiction and other types of like nonfiction to bring in. And then I'm reading a few books on the Tao, and trying to understand a little bit more about like how I deal with things and how I want to navigate the world. So I don't know. I could send you a list.
Yeah. Like any book that challenged your presumptions or changed your perspective or made you think about things differently.
Um, when it comes to work, somebody recommended um, what was the book? Well, actually, yeah, a few books. Never Split the Difference, very popular book, and that's changed like how I think about the person who I'm negotiating with. I think that was like really cool. The writer was the head of negotiate international negotiation for hostage for the FBI, and he also then worked with Harvard Business School to change that vocabulary into something like, I don't know. I think it's a great book, and also I think it's called The Startup Problem, or The Cold Start Problem. The
Cool stuff.
Cold Start Problem. Yes, I
Yeah.
think that book really helped me understand marketplaces, and and we haven't done a marketplace yet. And I think it's because I understand that it's not just something you like build and people will come. You have to really engineer both sides of the coin. So those two books were instrumental as well. I don't know. Yeah, there's a lot.
I see.
Yeah.
In like, can you give us like an overview how a week in your life looks like?
Um, a week in my life. Well, I get in super early. I like the beginning hours. I try my best. Well, if we step back. So I
Yeah.
wake up, I do a session of prayer meditation, and that kind of takes away the edge. When I wake up, I start like and like all these voices in my head, and so like it like helps me be grounded. Make coffee. I read for an hour on whatever subject that's necessary for deep blocks. I take a break around 2 and I work out, another meditation, and then I work in the afternoon. And then I try to stop around 6 and 7 to make dinner and be with my family. And that goes all the way till Friday. And then the weekends, I usually, if I can, if it's possible, my family and I, my parents and my sister and nephew, we go sailing and try to like just get away from that. And then now I've been going to New York once a month for a new partnership that we have, which will be announced soon. And so now I'm starting to get used to having a routine in New York, once a month, and that's going to be really interesting as well because it's really hard to like come back and then keep a routine and then,
Mhm.
but yeah, it's a challenging practice, but that's what it looks like.
I see. And like I'm always like try when I there are different tasks like in startup like getting clients or like marketing SEO, like identify the Pareto principle, like what is two things I can do that could do 80% of the job. Like do you, like if I were to ask like for deep blocks, what were few things or few decisions you had to make that made a very big difference in the company's trajectory?
In terms of marketing and sales, one of the biggest difference was beginning to generate really uh, informative content on LinkedIn.
Mm.
Once we started doing that, like our incoming traffic, and inbound leads just like completely changed.
Oh.
And we had tried email marketing, all kinds of social media, and we found that I think most of our customers are on LinkedIn. So I think that was like spending a couple of hours a day to generate good content, which I haven't done in a little bit, actually. But that proved to generate a lot of
Mm.
interest, and so we're now continuing to speak with those leads and closing them. That was one thing, and another, which you know very well, is to partner with a brand that can really use your services and can really help you bring something to market. I think that was more recently pivotal for us. So we're now working on products for this partnership through this partnership. And so my focus is actually now more than anything on making sure these products perform, well. And I have a big part in those in the execution of this work. So which I love too. But yeah, I think, testing what can bring people in, looking at the data and expanding on that.
Yes. And we are in 2030. What's the version of deep blocks we are looking at?
Okay, so counting on blockchain having every single title, holding every single property title, and counting on there being a big movement of also having all IoT devices expose all the building data into the blockchain as well. Deep blocks would be positioned in a way to be able to analyze that data and be able to invest in property or in fractional pieces of property across the country. So to be able to understand, different types of patterns and behaviors of city, behaviors of population, and trade right on the Deep Blocks platform that would be connected to the blockchain. So that's where we're moving towards, efficiency in investment and speed.
That's super exciting. Like I was in like I know that I was building smart contracts in blockchain, and like there's so many applications of tokenization. Like that uh, uh, vision made me think like what if there is like AI property investment agent that could real time monitor observation and based
Abs-
on the opportunity like trigger, like similarly you have like a lot of finance AI like robots, like investment robots.
Yes. I mean, if you look at the stock market 40 years ago, the beginning of algorithmic trading, you could have that in real estate. There's no difference between a building and a company. And what's interesting, I think, is if we see another way of funding real estate through the
Mm,
crowds, through even crypto investment, then the buildings that expose the most amount of data will be the buildings that will get the most liquidity,
mm,
right? So now you're shifting, you're pivoting this like idea of the developer keeping that data inside. Like, I'm not going to show you my rent roll, I'm not going to show you my operating expenses, to like exposing that, and the best buildings get invested on. And so now we have more incentives to build better buildings that show better data. And I think if that happens, we can completely transform our cities and the products that we build for them.
yeah. And like what do you think about like AI and blockchain with it's there's some polarity and like openness and closeness and like
I love transparency. And transparency will be, transparency and the single source of truth could happen with blockchain. And AI could simply be the way of optimizing that data and optimizing decisions based on that data. So I feel like they're, two sides of the same goal. And so I hope that they, more of these two schools of thought begin to work together.
yeah. I have one question which looking for an answer, but I haven't found anywhere, and I'm very curious to know your thoughts on this. Like data ownership, like of an apartment. Like if I'm a resident living in an apartment, is end user the owner? Is the apartment builder the owner? Is architect also has ownership of like the plan, or is the construction people? Like
Mhm.
hot
So
take.
I don't think there's a blanket answer, and maybe that's, I think every different person has an ownership over each data, unless you can just say nobody's an owner and everything should be exposed. And yeah, I would have to think about it, but maybe I would agree with that. But the operating expenses of a building, the amount of resources that it actually could waste and consumes, or that is, the developer, the owner of the building, assuming that this is a multifamily project. It will change if it's a condominium, right? Because now you have hundreds of owners. The actual by unit, like how much water I waste and all that stuff, that might be the the user of that unit. Not
Mm,
to say that I believe all of that should be exposed. All of it should be transparent. But maybe um, they benefit from making that transparent in different ways, right? In terms, because so there's a question like, why do we need ownership? Is it because um, the person who owns that data should be compensated
mm,
for that data? So like the question of why would be interesting to understand. But let's say if there was no compensation, maybe the developer would own that data. I don't know if the architect would own that data. I don't know why.
but like, flow plans for the apartment.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking of data as like
uh,
things that are fluid, or things that
Yeah,
like change over time.
operational. Yeah.
Um, but the architect is a contractor of the developer, right? Like
Yes.
who owns Do you believe that the developer owns an instance of that floor plan, or do they own the floor plan? And there's like a subtle difference.
Like ultimately, like I think the end user owns the flow plan, like because developer gave out the data. Like I don't know. Like it's a tricky question because
Yeah, I mean, the end user, if it's the condo owner, maybe, yes. But the multifamily owner is almost like, they're just leasing it.
yeah, yeah.
So, yeah. Ownership, I think it's going to be interesting. Like the meaning of ownership as more information becomes transparent will be really interesting.
So like by your previous statement, if contractor is hiring, like are like architects and all the service providers giving their IP, and like the developer is the sole IP owner for the instance of the building.
They're buying the IP essentially, but that has to be negotiated, right? Would it be cheaper for the developer if he didn't own the IP? Then would the price go down if you only owned an instance of that floor plan and not the floor plan itself? I don't think those conversations are. And you know what should be very transparent is the contractors' contracts with subcontractors,
Mm.
like, because I think, it's hard, even as a developer, to understand the real cost of things. So when that becomes super transparent, we're going to have a lot more efficiency in knowing and expecting, the result and the cost of that resulting product.
Yeah, like I was having an interesting discussion. Like a lot of contractors hire subcontractors, and like you think, okay, if you have all the line items, you can do some predictive analysis about building costs. But there are subs who just like do like overall one line item into like various subcategories. So if you don't have like subcategory or like detail level of data, how can you do cost analysis and prediction? So that's
Not just that, but like, what is the real cost of the material and labor? Because none of that is expressed. And therefore, like, and the reason is not, and the truth is, because, numbers are inflated. And
Mhm.
every person along the line inflates that number a little more,
Yeah,
right? And so until that stops, the end user is paying for all of this, right? So I think robotics is going to change that, and artificial intelligence is going to change that. Like maybe the industry of contractor will be very different once these technologies are in place.
yeah. Like I was so surprised by the difference in the quote I received for concrete foundation from 3 to 5 contractors I reached out. I was like, this is crazy.
Yeah, it is. It is. It is. Yeah, because when there's no transparency, you could do whatever you want with the numbers,
I see.
right? It's like a piece of art. It's whatever's anyone's willing to pay for it. And that's not the case when it comes to concrete. It should be like, this is the price of concrete and this is the labor. So that will change. I'm hopeful that that will change eventually. Maybe not in my lifetime, but it will change eventually.
I see. I know we are running out of time, so I have a rapid fire round.
Okay.
You have 10 seconds to answer, and you gotta keep it
Okay.
super brief. Your favorite movie,
The House of Yes,
your role model,
my mother and my father. I'll put them all in one.
your favorite architect,
I'll say Zaha Hadid. Yeah.
favorite city,
Miami.
any city which is in like top city in your travel bucket list.
Um, I love St. Bart's for vacation and New York for work.
3 words that would describe you.
Curious, um, willing, and I like to think patient, but that's debatable.
Yeah. What is one thing you would do if you have unlimited time and resources?
Write books,
I see. About which topic?
fiction, fiction related to conspiracies. I think that'd be fun.
I see. Um, any piece of advice which you would give to 18-year-old Olivia?
Yes, start meditating as soon as possible.
And what is the biggest difference you have seen before meditating and after you started?
Okay, I could describe it like this. There's all these responsibilities are always on you. If you meditate, they feel like they're floating on top of you. And if you don't meditate, you feel like they're weighing on you and you're carrying them. That's the difference.
It's like detaching and taking like a third perspective.
Yeah.
I, anything which we didn't cover in this interview and you would like to end on that note?
Um, I think I'll end on this because I've been thinking about it a lot. Is I think we should change the models that we use for buildings, and we should look at biomimicry and natural models, existing natural models, to develop our cities. And I hope we could get there, and I think AI can help get there.
Amazing. That's great way to end. It was indeed a great pleasure hosting you, Olivia.
Thank you for having me.